Okay. Is that good? Alright. Hi everyone, welcome to round 5 of UiTM IV 2014. My name is Bobby, I'll be your turn for this round. In OG we have II, we have A, in O we have Mara B, in closing up we have KUA, and in closing up we have Mara C. Under the motion that this House view that the he for she movement is regressive to the feminist cause, I'd like to welcome the Prime Minister with the debate. Yeah.
The way Emma Watson gave her speech at the UN General Assembly was as if the feminist movement only existed yesterday. Her speech was a broad and stereotypical assumption of what exactly feminist movements are supposed to be about. Her speech was a speech that was not representative of the plights of the many, especially of the people within within the countries of these leaders that exist within the UN General Assembly. We think that feminist movements have moved beyond Emma Watson's speech, but her making it an emblem of what the UN should fight for when it comes to women's rights will regress it, or is already regressing it. In my speech, I'll talk about two major levels. Right? Firstly, why is it principally inconsistent for Emma Watson to actually talk about this idea? And I'll also talk about the content of her speech and the movement for he or she, and why that's principally regressive towards the feminist movement in status quo. Secondly, I'll also talk about the thought of the type of harms that exist within individual countries or within the international acceptance of that ideology in itself. But before I move on towards these two major questions and two major arguments, a few characterizations. Firstly, what exactly was the content of this speech? We told you that Emma Watson's speech was inherently about, we tell you that Emma Watson's speech was inherently about two major things. Firstly, that it was about accepting that the male demographic was necessary in order to work forward feminist causes, i.e. he for she. But the other aspect of he for she that exists within her speech was that it was also about gender equality, i.e. the ability for individuals to not conform to gender roles. Basically, the basic tenets of liberal feminism. Secondly, was this idea of, so the second decision is, who exactly are these audiences within the UN General Assembly? They are people coming from a variety of countries, people from countries that are most likely than not haven't accepted the concept of feminism yet because they look at it as a liberal hegemony, right? So because of this wide spectrum of audiences and the fact that the UN is shoving this down their throat, that the emblem of feminism within the international movement should be about liberal feminism, it should be about forwarding only that particular cause, is something that needs to be strategically considered and analyzed in this debate, right? Let's talk about the first argument, of which I'll integrate the rest of my characterization and the necessary nuances in order to forward why exactly it's strategically bad, right? Firstly, this idea of principle argument, why exactly this is principally bad for the feminist movement? It's because the feminist movement has always been about inclusivity. We are in a world where feminist movements sit down are about accepting that you are not only talking about liberal feminists and people who want to forward rights of, let's say, exiting gender roles, but also about cultural feminism. Like existing within the cultural framework, we can still talk about feminism. This principle inclusivity is necessary in order for you to fix the perception problem that exists within feminism, i.e. the perception problem that feminism only belongs to the middle class white privileged individuals who rant on blogs or who talk about things on MTV or entertainment news, and not something that should be owned by many different types of women and many different classes of individual within the society. This is also principally exclusive because it's it's non-representative of the many different types of spectrums that exist when you talk about women's rights or rights of people in general. For example, when she talked about gender roles, she never talked about the intersex individuals who are people who are not male or female, people who still want to talk about sexuality as if it's not a binary, but these people were not considered even in her speech or even in the forwarding of the he or she speeches, right? But on a third level, we believe that because of the fact of because Emma Watson herself is the one that propagates this when she comes from a position of privilege, right? As opposed to the many different UN speeches that came before her that exist since the 70s. These women were often people who just went through a struggle. They're minorities, oppressed individuals that are representative of many different spectrums of society that people can feel empathy for, as opposed to an Emma Watson or a celebrity that have that facade of immunity and protection because of her reputation. And even worse, she was launching a campaign. This wasn't even just a storytelling the way Malala Yousafzai told about her autobiography. She was launching a campaign to say that this is feminism. The feminism is about forwarding only one form of inclusive framework. And that's why that principally in itself is exclusive and bad for the forwarding of feminism towards everyone within the UN General Assembly. But before I move on towards the practical harms and how we make feminism practically palatable to people within all of these countries, opening.
The way the he for she campaign works, Mr. Speaker, is to restructure the way society views the idea of femininity to not attach it to only women, but also the vulnerable in society. Why is it so wrong for Emma Watson, as you say, a privileged woman, to come forward and empathize with the individuals within society?
No, because we believe that it wasn't just about her empathizing with a particular sector of society. It was about her setting a definition on what exactly is considered good feminism. That good feminism has to be about abandoning all conventional roles, especially when this is not palatable to many conservative countries that accept that some form of gender roles need to be protected. And women's rights is about giving them economic capacity and the ability to vote, but not really all these extreme things. Let's go into the practical harms, right? Firstly, why is status quo? Why is she making feminism non-palatable? Firstly, because we told you that this is about the liberal extreme. It's about combating conventional gender roles and destroying not patriarchy, but actually making it more, ironically considering the content of her speech, anti-men. Because supposedly, the moment a guy within a conservative country tells you that you're supposed to be a guardian for your family, it's considered as anti-feminist because it conforms individuals toward one kind of sexual identity, especially when that's wrong, when their identity is based upon a culture they chose, upon a culture they were raised up in, and a culture they can use as a framework in order to forward their idea of rights, right? These individuals that will now see that when you talk about feminism, it doesn't only talk about the practical benefits of people on the ground, but also talk about the principal acceptance that you have to abandon your conventional sexuality, that you have to abandon your conventional culture, right? Secondly, why is that making palatable is important? Because political capital is necessary in order for you to at least start the discussion with the conservative countries about feminism. The problem with people on the ground is that they're too afraid to attach themselves to the ideology of feminism, especially the conservative countries, because it is seen as liberal hegemony. So the only way you can start a discussion is if you don't have someone like Emma Watson talking about only one spectrum of feminists and making it the emblem of that particular organization. Political capital is necessary in order to create voting blocks, in order to create acceptance and discussions, and the beginning of that discourse within conservative countries. It also is bad because it talks about the dependence on patriarchy, that you need men in order to forward feminist rights. This is especially horrible for independent women organizations who want to forward their rights. I'll be explained further in my second speaker. But the point of this is simple. Feminism has been about inclusivity. We don't think the he for she movement speaks about that. It is exclusive. It is only about privilege and not representative of every single country within the UN. That's why I believe it's regressive.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for the speech. To open the opposition, I'd like to welcome the leader of.
Mr. Speaker, as a feminist, I can tell you that the fracture of the feminist movement is a reason why there's not enough traction within society in order for individuals to be able to empathize with the feminist movement, Mr. Speaker. Not only the multiple ideas that exist, we also believe, Mr. Speaker, that the reason why the feminist movement has not gained the kind of trajectory of growth that side opening government wanted was because the idea of femininity isn't an inclusive concept, Mr. Speaker, that it's man-hating, and we reject that characterization. And we think that this campaign perfectly encapsulates the way in which we move forward in terms of how we reach our goal. We think that all the things our opening government was talking about it's not mutually exclusive, Mr. Speaker, because we reject the characterization that Emma Watson was only championing liberal feminism. We don't think that this speech is reflective of the whole campaign. We think that this speech also, Mr. Speaker, also touches on points that talks about the radical feminism, Mr. Speaker. The idea of rejecting gender roles is a core principle in radical feminism as well. That means her speech isn't a unitary speech, Mr. Speaker. But secondly, we also think that the problem here is this: she never told you in her speech that the way in which society fixes itself is by rejecting gender roles. What did she tell you in her speech? She told you that she wants to create empathy in the way that gender role isn't only extended to women, but it's also extended to men as well, Mr. Speaker. That was the objective of her speech. That was the objective of the campaign, Mr. Speaker. No, thank you. Let's look at the debate coming from side opening opposition. Firstly, we're going to look at the way in which the world views feminism. Secondly, we're going to tell you what this campaign entails. And thirdly, how it's better for the feminist movement in terms of trying to gain inclusivity in support. Firstly, the way in which people view feminism, Mr. Speaker. Though we think that the feminist movement is something that still exists within the world, that it's not a popular notion anymore, and B, it's not a universal fight anymore, Mr. Speaker. Why? The way in which individuals view the feminist movement is always attached upon the rhetoric that the reason why we're in this position is because we're oppressed by men, Mr. Speaker. It's because we hate all men, because the kind of privileges that they had because they were born with a penis sets them apart from other females within society, Mr. Speaker. Why? Because we think that this overbearing standard and rhetoric that perpetually blames men harms the feminist cause. Sit down. We believe that while this is the reason the problem started, it's not as black and white anymore, Mr. Speaker. How so? We think that that you have more men joining the fight. We have a self-identified feminist judging this debate, right? But B, we also have women who don't want to partake in this fight anymore, Mr. Speaker, because postmodern feminists don't like to be associated to a negative connotation or a negative standard to what makes you a feminine or to the idea of femininity, Mr. Speaker. And that leads me to the second level. What does a he for she campaign necessarily entail? Because we don't understand why opening government spend such a substantial amount of time talking about Emma Watson and her privileged life. Yes, we get it. She's very beautiful. She's very smart. She has nice dresses. I wish I had her closet as well. But we also think that the way in which she spoke and brought up that campaign is to reshape the way in which the world views the idea of feminism. The perpetual idea that exists right now is that the feminism is for women's right because women were oppressed by men. But the campaign wants to work in such a manner that we expand the concept of femininity, Mr. Speaker, in recognizing that vulnerability isn't a value that's mutually exclusive to the female communities, Mr. Speaker. Recognizing that gender role isn't something that's mutually exclusive to the female community, Mr. Speaker. Within the campaign, the idea of femininity is expanded to include individuals that are vulnerable in nature, individuals that are always substantially put in on a lower pedestal. This also includes individuals who are homosexual, Mr. Speaker, or individuals who don't want to identify with a particular form of gender, Mr. Speaker. We think that the idea of femininity under the he for she campaign is more inclusive, as opposed to always continuing on this rhetoric that we want to hate men and all men are bad. But thirdly, what stance is better for the feminist movement? But before I move on, I'll take Zip.
Because that speech itself is also about abandoning conventional gender roles, how do you plan to make feminism more palatable to a country that thinks of it as a bad word?
No, that's not what she meant, right? The way in which she phrased the way in which the campaign works, Mr. Speaker, especially considering countries that don't want to accept the idea of feminism, is to try or create an impetus for countries to start recognizing that just because you like to stay at home with your child and you're a male, that doesn't make it a bad thing. That just because you're a father, that doesn't mean you should be less valued than your mother, Mr. Speaker. She never told you that we should start abandoning gender roles. We don't think that conservative countries will suddenly go crazy and not want to accept this problem, right? But thirdly, what stance is better for the feminist movement? Because I've already alluded in my speech, Mr. Speaker, recognizing that we're in the 21st century right now, and we have a generation that's born with the idea that my rights are rights that are inherent within me. These are individuals who never had to suffer the kind of oppression, be it male or female. These are individuals who never had to stand and picket and fight for their right. These are individuals, not like R. Davis, who had to create her her own college in order to ensure that the female community in the United Kingdom had a place to go, Mr. Speaker. These are individuals that are modern and understand that this is something that's right. But the way in which we'll galvanize support, Mr. Speaker, should not be contingent upon something that is necessarily negative anymore. What do we mean by this? That we don't want a creation of a feminist movement that is absolutist in the idea of feminism. And that's what the He for She campaign does. That it rejects the connotation that it should be all women, pro-women, for women, Mr. Speaker, in recognizing that the inclusivity of men within this particular scenario also shows that the idea of femininity can be expanded irrespective of what gender or what sex you choose to identify yourself with. How do we galvanize support? Women like Jasmine, who don't necessarily believe in the absolutist idea of feminism, can now start to believe in this, in the fact that, hey, the feminist movement does not have to rely upon the fact there were negative connotations that happened 70 years ago, that is starting to move forward and recognizing there are other individuals who are disadvantaged within society, and we need to start taking up the mantle to care for those particular individuals as well. But B, men who can't relate with the fight, because these are individuals like men who don't understand why women need to have their rights. We think that in a particular scenario, the He for She campaigns also tells him that he can be vulnerable, that he can have feelings, that it tells Calvin that sometimes he can cry at night and hug his brother Sean because it's a good thing to feel, Mr. Speaker. But thirdly, anti-feminists, these are individuals who don't have the rhetoric anymore that says that your fight is an obsolete fight because the kind of oppression that is being faced by feminism right now isn't the same as individuals within the past, Mr. Speaker. But lastly, in appealing to conservatives, I already told you, in terms of trying to create a trajectory of change within those nation states, you have to show an idea that's more universal, that's more applicable to all subsects of society, and recognizing that vulnerability and being a person is the way in which we need to start viewing femininity. We are extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition. Let's welcome the Deputy Prime Minister.
A lot of feminist fighters out there feel insulted because it's as if Emma Watson is the one who sparked the feminist movement around the world, as if she is the one who propagate all sort of ideology in regards to how you should behave and how you should propagate the movement altogether. The movement currently is more fractured than it was before because everyone thinks that the highlighted airtime given to Emma Watson have managed to cripple down all the other slow upbringing they have been fighting for as of now, not only in liberal countries like America, but also in conservative countries like Saudi Arabia. Because this debate is not only about He for She campaign that is only exclusive towards the Hollywood A-list like rules of joining, but for everyone else and the impact towards them. And this is where I'm going to highlight my arguments. I'll integrate the rebuttals into my argumentation. First question that I'm going to ask in today's debate, is it strategic for feminist movement to join the He for She umbrella? Because this is basically the crux of Jay's speech. Because he said it is extremely important for us to have an inclusive framework. But is it really inclusive? Let's analyze it properly. Number one, she told us that you must now accept that it's okay for you to be vulnerable. Everyone needs to be accepted towards that particular ideology. Analyze it from a fact that how a patriarchal man would view this particular ideology. He's already in this particular stuck mindset that woman is below him and they shouldn't even be equal at all. Is it the right strategy for you to move along that direction by telling that you are the same as me before you even gain any formal rights? That is why we believe it is extremely problematic, because feminist movement, the battle differs from a geographical location to another. You cannot simply say that we must create an inclusive framework where everyone can join the bandwagon and everyone suddenly will get their rights all of a sudden. That's too realistic. That's not going to become a reality if you continue along that particular tangent for a few reasons. Number one, because once you acknowledge that it is no longer a specific battle but a universal battle, that means you lose traction among other feminist movements who are already joining who decide to move away, what happens then? It means only those who support the he for she campaign can basically campaign and gain that particular political mileage or gain that particular airtime. What happens for other basic feminist movement who wants other rights to be given first, who believe that there is another form of democracy that they need to cater to, there's another form of strategy they need to highlight? That you are pushing all of their effort for years and years of struggle away just because of Emma Watson's argument, but you must join a universal banner. Yeah. Sit down. But next argument is, you need to understand the sound bites that Emma Watson gave and how it caused tension within people from conservative countries. Number one, it has already created backlash. Now, once you hear the word feminist, automatically you will label it and you will direct it to the idea of he for she campaign. It is ultimately bad for a few reasons. Number one, those conservative people will never change their mindset. In order for us to create a proper form of discourse, is for us to slowly engage with them, for us to even get our rights step by step, for us to like gain our right, like freedom to drive and so on, before you start asking for something which much more drastic and will cause shockwave among the society in total. You are not doing that. You're jumping the gun and going straight to the idea that we must fight for equality and so on. But before I go on, yes.
In most conservative states, the idea of feminism is an alien concept. There's no impetus for change under your side of the house. At the very least, our side allows for the expansion of the idea of feminism. At the very least, it becomes more palatable to a larger number of individuals.
There's an insult for all of those cultural feminist movement that has been going on in Saudi Arabia. Are you telling me that they're not doing anything, that they're just keeping quiet and not asking for their rights and so on? Even if they're asking for their rights, you're telling me that your effort is useless. You better join my movement. What sort of message are you telling me? You're telling me that now feminist movement is being dictated by a privileged, white, successful woman who never suffered as anyone else. She was privileged. She went to Brown University in comparison with someone who might be in black skin, who might have to undergo racial boundaries and then gender boundaries before entering that particular university. It's extremely unacceptable for you to simply say that she is the best one to define what feminist movement is. What do we fight for in our paradigm? We fight for a few things. Number one, we fight for diversity among movement. The reason why we must maintain the idea of diversity is for a few reasons. Number one, you must understand the complex battle that is going on, because you cannot simply homogenize every single battle to have the same particular strategy and the same particular outcome that you want to achieve at the end of the day. Because those feminist movement in specific context really understand what is going on the ground and can really understand what do you really need to fight for and so on. How they gain political mileage in our paradigm in contrast to that. Once you don't make it such a horror for you to join feminist movement, when you find much more attachment to join a cultural feminist movement in comparison with he for she, those women who before this were afraid to even come out of their house, at least will join a particular movement to begin with. But in their paradigm, when patriarchal men are afraid to hear the word feminist, they will start locking their daughters, they will start locking their wife to make sure that they don't even enter any sort of feminist movement to begin with. If you're considering that to be status quo, tell me how he or she will suddenly change everything and women will suddenly be brave enough to come out, because fighting for equality is much more harder for you to even gain your basic rights. For example, your right to vote or even your right to drive. You even haven't gained that. Tell me like how all of a sudden your idea or your ideology will gain any form of traction at all, no analysis at all. But second of all, like how this will regress any idea of you being an independent woman. Basically, what this campaign sends a message is, I need to depend on men in order for my message to be successful. This is counterintuitive for a lot of feminist movement who believe that in order for me to gain my right, I need to fight for what I truly believe in. I don't need men to define what my roles are. I don't need men to help me and so on. These are exactly what is underlined under our paradigm in contrast to them. In their paradigm, they assume that in order for us to be successful, we need to make sure everyone feels vulnerable. We need to make sure that man feels the same way as a woman. That basically means you are making it extremely much more difficult for independent women to champion for any right at all, because you are saying that in order for them to be successful, you need the help of a man. This extremely discriminates all of those independent women that have been fighting for their right as of now. But the most important thing of this debate is on the idea to confirm gender roles. In which part of her speech that she's talked about other spectrum of feminist movement or other battles that happen in that particular paradigm. In her 12-minute speech, it was only a platform for her to launch her own campaign, a campaign that only fits in one demographic, which is a liberal context. It doesn't fit in every single context. That's something that you need to defend, and tell me why a guy from Saudi Arabia will all of a sudden listen to he for she campaign and will join the battle. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. Concluding the half of the debate, I'd like to welcome the Deputy Leader Hall.
Mr. Chair, the way feminist movement has been represented in the fight for women's rights, we forgot the goal of equality. The problem with gender inequality isn't the men or the women, but how our society is politicized and reflective of a sexist power structure that creates expectation on both men and women. We think it's time we reset the feminist movement to understand that gender inequality is for both sides of the spectrum. So a few questions in this debate. One, how do we approach the still conservative nations who subscribe to patriarchal values? And secondly, how do we deal with the fractionalization of the feminist movement that they say will happen? Thirdly, will this define the feminist movement by its radical ideologies? And thirdly, how it is different from status quo. All right, first question. Because they were so concerned about the fact that conservative nations will retaliate, as though the feminist movement have never been radical before, as though the feminist movement have never been loud before and haven't been expressive before about gender equality as well as the non-existence of gender roles. Sit down. But we think that gender roles are prevalent even in patriarchal societies, right? How do we deal with this? We think it's not a question about whether or not it's the right time, but it's a question that we need to start questioning those gender roles. And the way in which we should question those gender roles is by assessing them on both spectrum. Are men also affected by these gender roles? Are women also affected by these gender roles? In which the manner in which a he for she campaign prescribed, we look at it, is that if you're a guy and the idea that it's amazing for you to have many wives because it shows that you're dominant and you have a lot of power in society, affects men as well because they have certain expectation into how they have to behave. So that patriarchal value is expected of them. And we think that this idea of he for she campaign can help them question that particular value, and we think this is how we should approach the patriarchal society, by making them understand that it's a concern for them too, especially since in patriarchal societies the narrative are largely controlled by the men. So the way in which we want them to approach those things is to understand that they have a stake in this particular issue too, that they have a stake in this narrative as well. So we think in fact it's easier to fight cultural feminism, and we think it's faster if we allow this particular idea to be an idea of both sides. Because the problem in fighting for cultural feminism is that there is a huge lack of empathy from the side of men. And we think we need to start galvanizing that part of empathy from men. But let's now talk about the feminism of the 20th century, because this was something they didn't want to engage with. That current days, we are also already losing feminists from people of our generation, because the idea of feminism is either too radical or too unacceptable to a lot of people. Because believe it or not all women want to be devoid of men. We want to coexist with men as well, and we want to also empathize with men. So the fact that feminism, in most part, reject that idea makes it hard to be palatable to most people of our generation. And I think that this is extremely hard. And let's answer the question. Sit down, sir. The fractionalization of the feminist movement. They say that this creates such a huge shock to the feminist movement that it fractionalizes it. Well, firstly, we don't think that's true, right? Firstly, just been a month and we haven't seen people locking up their daughters, so we don't understand the extremist value coming from that side. But the idea of fractionalization of feminist movement, we think that already happened in current status quo anyway. The thing is, there are different ideologies of feminists in status quo, and that's fine. There are radical feminists and there are liberal feminists who still exist, and we think those are fine, right? And furthermore, they wanted to say that this campaign, no thank you, sir, would define feminist movement. But we think there are many other radical feminist ideology who haven't fully defined feminist movement yet. Like, for example, the bra burning incident or slut walk. Those incidents haven't definitely defined the feminist movement. People on the ground still understand that there are rationality to many sectors of feminist movement. That feminist movement never is always defined by one single campaign. campaign. But if they are, we think the he for she campaign is a wonderful campaign to define the feminist movement, especially to it to be relatable for people who care the less. And we think that feminist movement, especially in our generation, need this the most, right? Any POI, sir?
Man, Jane said in her speech that you don't want any more fractious movement, you want it to be an inclusive movement. Tell me, how is this not defining what feminist movement is all about, and how cultural feminism is also going to accept this movement when they can't even get basic rights like right to right?
So when we say we wanted inclusion, they thought we wanted an imposition on every other people or every other feminist movement in society. Feminists have always been prescribing ideologies. That hasn't changed, and this will not change. But that doesn't mean we're immediately impositioning upon the people who are cultural feminists. The only way they'll be offended is that we go into their country and prescribe them what to do. But we're merely telling them another ideology the way we always have. We don't think this is a major shock, and we don't understand why it is, right? So what they wanted on their side is no different from what we wanted. No, thank you, sir. Like, for example, the feminists always wanted gender equality. And the feminists always wanted a lot of new ideas or to redefine the way feminists work. But what they didn't want is this idea that men are also included in this particular narrative, or the fact that Emma Watson was the person saying that. The fact that this campaign is inclusive, does that we mean that everybody can participate in that narrative, whether you're Emma Watson or whether or not you're someone else, right? Or whether or not you're a man or a woman. We think that it's either strategic to use Emma Watson or either not strategic to use Emma Watson. The fact that the campaign still creates a huge amount of discussion. And another problem that they had was that the campaign was too popular, or the campaign was redefining feminism. And we think it's good. That's extremely popular and create a huge amount of discussion because it creates a spark that the feminist movement needs. Feminism is an idea that was created a long time ago but loses traction over time. We think that sometimes ideologies like this create a rediscussion of all the ideas that exist within society and create a new paradox into how we discuss those ideas. And we think a rebranding of feminism or a refresh start to feminism is also a very, very good thing, right? So in conclusion, on side opening opposition, what we stand for is the inclusiveness of the he for she campaign to strategically involve men in this campaign as well. We think what we also stand for is the fact that there are fractionalization within people who believe in the idea of gender equality itself, while forgetting that it's gender equality, only thinking that it's women's right. So how do we galvanize support from the conservative people, the patriarchal people, the anti-feminists, and the common person that we have today? We're extremely proud to oppose.
Thank you. MIDP Yoruba to open the closing half of the debate. I'd like to welcome the member of God.
The He for She campaign is founded on two main principles. Firstly, that men face sexism, and secondly, that men should help women because women face sexism. We have a problem with these two issues. That's like closing the government's case. Before I introduce this, I'm going to talk to you about I'm going to tell you a few rebuttals coming from side opening opposition. Firstly, they came up and said Emma's movement is great because her version of feminism is now expanding of everyone. First response to this, right? Okay, this sounds great, this sounds nice, but what is the intention? What's the point of the feminist movement helping homosexual people and men? We don't see that, right? Okay, even then, we tell you that coming from side opening opposition, there was never a clear and concise answer to begin with on how this inclusivity helps the feminist movement. And that's what this debate is about. What helps the feminist movement? That's the rebuttals to that. But then they went on, and then they said the feminist movement is more palatable. Then the question is this: how is it palatable when you water down the strength of women as a whole? I'll talk to you more about this in my extension, but I'll talk to you more in my extension. Not yet. Have a seat. And then they went out and said, "Many status quo are weak too." Again, this directly clashes with my extension. But fundamentally, we don't think this is accurate to begin with, and it's in fact we don't think this is accurate because the whole idea of the feminist movement was equal sex, equal rights for all. In this case, we don't think that there's a weaker or stronger sex per se. Again, also will be analyzed in my extension. And the last thing, then my last rebuttal, my last response to what they said on how we're losing feminists, fundamentally untrue. simple logic is that we're gaining feminists to begin with in this day and age, especially in liberal democracies. We've seen the numbers of people in feminist movements triple, even quadruple, and we think that this argument totally doesn't make sense. Yeah.
The definition of a feminist is that therefore political, social, and economic equality across all gender. Under your side of the house, the rhetoric is perpetuated to men hating. How will this help government support?
We don't think so. No, not at all. We don't see, because look, we don't think that our side necessarily portrays inequality per se, because and that PI just doesn't stand as a result. Okay, I will talk to you more about that in my extension. All right. Okay. Firstly, on how men face sexism under the he for she principle. All right. First of all, we think this is a naive principle to begin with, and also that now the patriarchal society has a voice. Why is this so? Because we think that by introducing this principle, right now, this actively propagates discrimination to begin with. Now that the rhetoric is now the patriarchal society also faces discrimination. Now it is justified. Now it provides them a ground at the very least to say that it is fair that the patriarchy now receives what it previously dished out to women, what the feminist movement wanted to solve in the first place. Sit down, right? So the ultimate result of this is now it is more this gives the patriarchy reason, right, to come up and say, look, now that we are also facing the same kind of discrimination that you previously said we are facing, this allows conservative voices to now say men face sexism. It is now okay for us for women to be to face it too, because now it goes both ways. Now it's not just men saying women face sexism. Now women think men face sexism too. No, sit down. And furthermore, we tell you that under this, the conclusion to this point is that it devalues the voice of women as a whole. Why is this so? This is so because now that I've established that the patriarchy faces discrimination, and then now that they have more reason and justification to say we don't to not treat discrimination to women so seriously, this means that the voice of women in the future will be severely the value of the content of what they say will be severely tarnished, Mr. Speaker. Because ultimately it regresses the feminist cause, because now the voice of women is not as strong as it previously was before the movement and before this movement was introduced in the United Nations General Assembly. Sit down. Okay. Second extension, right? And this is where opening government closing government distinguishes itself from opening, because even though the DPM talked about this in a 6-minute, we still found it was underanalyzed and there wasn't much explanation to begin with. Okay. So opening government talked about why Emma Watson saying it at the UN General Assembly regresses the feminist movement. But in this point, you hear from us why the he for she movement and principles are regressive to the feminist movement, and that's what we think this debate is about. Okay, now this argument, right, on protectionism and how it's culturally patriarchal. So this argument is the argument of protectionism, right? The argument that women can help themselves. Women are weak, therefore men need to step in and help them and provide for them. We think that this occurs under the movement because we heard that men should help. We heard her say that men should help women because women face sexism. So, sit down, all of you. She raises this issue, this cultural patriarchal issue, because why? Because she implies that men are in a position to protect to begin with. Yeah. Why is this wrong? Sit down. Because this brings about the very sexism that this movement, the feminist movement, sought to eliminate in the first place, right? Okay, so now that I've talked to you about this, then we can safely say that this brings about even more sexism than there ever was in the first place, because now not only have I told you, like, first men face sexism to begin with, and now there's a justification for the patriarchal society not to care about this issue and just shelve it aside. Now she further goes on and helps the patriarchal cause per se, because now she implies that men are in a position to protect, which is the very principle of equality, that the very principle of inequality which shouldn't exist. So now I already taken one. So this actually actively brings up about sexism. Then moving on, it also further propagates the idea of patriarchy, because not only does it bring about sexism, now the patriarchal idea is even propagated even further in society. Okay, simple example, right? In a conservative society, men generally force women to wear burqa, right? So under this directly suppresses their freedom of expression, right? But they think their justification for this is that they are protecting women, right? So as a result of that, basically they're treating women like children, right? So under the umbrella of protection. So now what you do is you give these people more incentive and more means to do and carry out this form of protectionism. That's wrong. That totally contradicts the feminist movement at the very, very core. We don't think that should ever happen, because in the end, we're all for the feminist movement. We think women's rights should be protected. Mr. Speaker, if you want to go with a group that for a better feminist movement and better defense of women's rights as a whole, you go with side closing government.
Thank you, members of government. Members of opposition.
Okay, Hafiz. Is it working? Hi, Mom. Just kidding. Mr. Speaker, Team Emma Watson is very proud to stand right in front of you and back up this campaign that already exists within status quo. What we had here was side opening government, which only had their brains in the Middle East, Mr. Speaker, never really wanting to engage with the fact that the most relevant context is one which probably Emma Watson had spoken about, which comes to liberal feminism. Where the side closing government who probably had no idea what feminism means, and they probably need Kelvin to save that team. We had side opening opposition here, Mr. Speaker, which comprised of two lovely women, but they also required the help of two men, therefore, hashtag he for she, therefore working effectively as to what this campaign can necessarily do for the feminist movement at large. What's on the table and what's really up for discussion within today's debate? We think that the first issue is this, Mr. Speaker, about to be integrated in the issues. The first issue is this: why men will most likely join this feminist movement now, sit down, and secondly, who does this feminist movement, who does this campaign really affect at the end of the day? So the first issue, Mr. Speaker, is this: why men will most likely not join the feminist movement. Look, I'm very sure all of us within this room have probably looked at and observed Emma Watson's speech in the UN. To say the least, Mr. Speaker, it was rather moving. But even then, for me, that it felt very much like an open invitation to understand what really the feminist movement is all about. If it wasn't for that speech, I probably could give this debate right now. To say that it regresses the feminist movement, Mr. Speaker, is to inherently undermine the amount of effort that the feminist movement has so much fought for over the 100 years, even then, right? But also, why is it very important? It's not that the feminist movement only affects women, Mr. Speaker, and this is how closing opposition will sound very different from our opening opposition. Because men have always also been on the receiving end, no pun intended, of flack from all the feminist movement attacks that existed in the first place. How we were always antagonized as that one gender, Mr. Speaker, that caused or made these women feel this amount of pressure that they already do feel right now. But now, how have men suffered before or even right now? On the flip side, it means this: it wasn't really that good for men too. The anti-men mentality was that how always people had in their minds, people like probably Zim and Amsha also, was that it was so much cultivated throughout the years before this by the effect of women fighting so much for feminism. That's why they rejected men when any form of approach was even given or was tried firstly. But moreover, it means this: that you create a further ostracization in showing that a simple open invitation is one that shouldn't be done and women can't really do it right now. So that basically means this, right? That women want to make it through the rain alone. Not only does that mean this, Mr. Speaker, that you also harm the movement, that you no longer have societal traction as to what part men can also play within this, but also men can never participate and alleviate the problems that already exist within status quo. Because let's face it, it's not only women who also are affected by this. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, is this: who does it affect? Zim wanted to come up here and lie to my face in telling me that this movement is one that pisses off and regresses the feminist movement in non-liberal feminist countries. Even to the largest extent, Mr. Speaker, that's not true. Look, more often than not, regardless of where you're practicing feminism, be it the Middle East or wherever Emma Watson may be, the ability for men to join the combat in battle will also aid these feminist movements right now. Because what kind of a feminist movement will reject speech that Emma Watson gave, right? But also, even if your movement doesn't really subscribe to what Emma Watson's speech necessarily was, it serves as a wake-up call or as to a model as to what the feminist movement can also reach right now. You can't just tell me, Mr. Speaker, that how Amshah said that we probably insult the Saudis by having this. In fact, Mr. Speaker, Emma Watson's speech was not an order to call all the patriarchal men that exist within the Middle Eastern society, that it's a complete order for you to help women right now. But it's also one which is a favorable, on a very large scale, a cry of help that can also work one day, inshallah, that would happen within Middle East in itself. Before I move on to my amazing extension, I'll take the handsome one.
In conservative countries, men already know that women need them. How is this open invitation changing any patriarchal societal traction against their patriarchy?
No, okay, firstly, you say in conservative countries, it's men who understand that women need the help. That's in liberal countries. But even to the largest extent, when men already understand this, that's when you take that next natural extension of a step from an opening invitation from Emma Watson's speech to make that step that you necessarily have to make right now without anyone having a veil of you not helping these people right now. That's off of your eyes. Sit down, Amshah. So my first extension, and it's amazing extension, listen to it, is this. Why the feminist movement benefits from the active participation of men right now. People have to understand this within this room, that the open invitation to serves as a natural extension or a catalyst as to how you can help the feminist movement at large. Here's the reality. Sure, Mr. Speaker, it wasn't men who had to bear the full brunt. And even to the larger extent, we were deemed as a reason why women were put at a certain disadvantage before this. But that's the inherent problem that exists within their minds, is that you always assume it's the men's fault, and the men can never remunerate or can never do something in order to alleviate the problem that exists right now. You have to deal with the cards that you have already been dealt with, and that's what we do with the campaign. We think that inclusivity of men will have many benefits at large. We told you that you can benefit in these certain ways. Firstly, our movement on a larger scale will be able to gain the support of men and opens up a new avenue for this cause. Look, even if you don't support the campaign for #HeAndShe, that doesn't mean you don't have to really tweet it with a hashtag. But the inclusion of men means that you also open up to a more relatable basis towards society at large. That leads to more relevance and understanding as a whole. And that's how you gain societal traction right now. Which means that you also, Mr. Speaker, change the perception for cultural feminism to also shift the blame from men to people who can also help you right now. And this is very important at large. Here's the difference, right? And how powerful this campaign can be. Especially when the fourth wave of feminism is ready. We think it benefits men on a level where firstly you read the resentment that cultural feminism has had for these people right now, that these people can also aid you as men. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, how you get rid of all the negative connotations that feminism has tried to abolish over years. And thirdly, how you open up with lesser aggression in order for men to join this. The conclusion is this, Mr. Speaker, that it does benefit the feminist movement at large. And here's the most important thing. If not now, then when? If not me, then who? 10 points goes to Gryffindor, 10 points goes to closing opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma Watson, for the speech. I'd like to welcome Government Whip to the
There are two things side closing government has a problem with the he for she movement. Number one, that men face sexism, and we think that this regresses the feminist movement. And number two, that men are supposed to help women fight sexism at the same time because women face it. Two things that are really contradictory in nature, Mr. Speaker. But first thing first, what am I going to talk to you about today in this debate? Number one, I'm going to deal with the issue of inclusivity. And number two, I'm going to deal about the issue of whether or not men joining the battle will be helpful to the feminist cause or the cause of men, which sort of sums up the benefits of inclusivity from opening opposition. But firstly, on inclusivity, we think it's a problem in terms of opening opposition's case of not having a positive material in the first place, right? Because they wanted to tell you that it's inclusive. We agree, it can be inclusive. If you say that the feminist movement will accept more homosexuals to be part of the movement, to accept more men to be part of the movement, we agree that it's inclusive. But, Mr. Speaker, what is the point of it being inclusive? Because that's something that they never told us as to what's the benefit to the feminist movement if it's inclusive. Yes, we have more people, but are they fighting for the same thing? And they never explain how inclusivity helps the feminist movement. The only thing that they could tell us was it's more palatable in terms of presenting it to the society. The first question is, how is it palatable when you water down the strength of women? Because the first thing we told you in extension is that it justifies the narratives men already have. Men face sexism, hence it's okay for men to dish it out as well, since they are receiving it, right? So there's the same patriarchal narrative that you empower and you embolden under status quo. It's not more palatable, it's an argument, Mr. Speaker, for the patriarchal society to use. But at the same time, if you recruit individuals from the homosexual community, like Jay said, who are also facing troubles of acceptance, Mr. Speaker, how does this exactly help the feminist movement? Because they cannot just jump away from this debate and say the feminist movement fights for everyone. Because we have to be realistic and say the feminist movement has to first fight for equal rights for women. And you can't just say the feminist movement is a global charity organization that helps for everyone, Mr. Speaker. That doesn't make sense at all. They told us also that men in status quo are weak too, and so this is a great thing. But firstly, it's highly inaccurate and naive, right? No, thank you, I'm sorry. Because it's not a major thing that men in status quo face patriarchy, Mr. Speaker. Corporate culture sort of makes it impossible for there to be a completely full women-based company that can discriminate a man. We think it's difficult for women to make it up there in society right now to discriminate men. Like, there's a number of instances in society where a woman is able to push sexism on a man, Mr. Speaker, is very small and minute. This addition to the feminist movement is something that they need to tell us will be beneficial, which is something that they did not tell us at all. But where did their arguments conclude? No, thank you. Their arguments concluded in closing opposition, when they told us that if men join the battle, it's somehow more beneficial. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, there was no explanation how when men join this feminist movement and feel the same narrative, they will somehow defend women, right? Because if the narrative that they're going for is that men are facing sexism, that's why they're joining the feminist movement, then they're joining the feminist movement to stop the sexism faced by men. They never told us why this can't be a self-serving decision to join the feminist movement, which is something that men are more likely to do under your policy. And what's worse is that it's the conservative that'll be more emboldened, like we told you in our extension, right? The only analysis that they had, I will take opening in a while, the only extension that they had is that explanation that they had is that it becomes more relatable. We think that it's only more relatable to a large number of people if there is a large number of male members of society who are facing sexism, that they face sexism and they feel a need to join the feminist movement and defend that sexism, Mr. Speaker. That in itself explains why they would join the feminist movement and join the whole idea, but that doesn't explain why it's beneficial to the feminist movement as well, because they're defending themselves. I mean, this is problematic, right? And if they join to defend themselves, then it's not beneficial to the feminist movement. We told you on 2 reasons why it's regressive to the feminist movement. Number 1, how we think protectionism in itself is a culturally patriarchal argument. And we told you also how patriarchal society has more of an argument right now, including the fact that men face sexism. But before I move on to that, yes, Jasmine.
We think that you miss the context of what we're talking about, right? The idea is that if you oppress the woman, you are oppressed as well by the expectation that society places upon you. It's not that women discriminate you also, therefore you can discriminate women. It's entirely different from what
you need to repeat your PR, I'm sorry.
Okay. The idea is that if you oppress a woman, that you are oppressed as well because of the expectation that society places upon you. So the oppression comes from the sexist nature of society rather than whether women discriminate against men as well.
This PR is so meta. I don't know what the expectation on society is from you. If you oppress women, Mr. Speaker, the expectation from society on you is to not oppress women. That's not sexism if you're told not to oppress women, Mr. Speaker. disappear, I don't understand. But let's move further with our extension. Because what did we tell you that Mukris did not respond to? We told you that protectionism is a culturally patriarchal argument. Why is this so? Because if you say that men are supposed to protect women, and in a movement you say that men are supposed to protect women on a large scale, Mr. Speaker, you're also buying into the same thing that the patriarchal society has been saying for thousands of years. The only reason right now I'm suppressing you and you're subordinate to me is because I need to protect you, Mr. Speaker. That's the same argument that patriarchal societies all around the world use. And it's the same argument that Emma Watson is currently forwarding in the UN General Assembly. To say that the patriarchal society is, to say that if women are facing problems with sexism, then it's men who should help them. We think this weakens the position of women itself, and especially since the feminist movement is all about gaining equal ground on your own and making your own choices, we don't think that this helps the feminist cause. It regresses the feminist cause. And that was not responded to at all. Secondly, we told you that the patriarchal society has more of an argument since men have a justification to be sexist towards women. This is something that they didn't respond to either. But in terms of the argument on men and how recruiting men will be better, they told us that they need to do this at the same time because they're losing feminists. The only reason this is not true, Mr. Speaker, is because they are not losing feminists. Since the world is generally becoming more liberal, that individuals are liberalizing even further, that's why more and more women are becoming emboldened to join the feminist movement and fight the sort of suppression that is currently being faced by them, that is being dished out to them by men. We think that's perfectly normal under status quo, and we think we are perfectly fine with that. We don't think the feminist movement is losing feminists, that they need to replace it with men who fight for something completely different that does not relate to the feminist movement at all. For all those reasons, we are very, very proud to propose.
Thank you, Government Whip. We'll wait for the opposition and debate. Let's welcome the opposition whip.
Patriarchy is a word that you will never use outside of debate. Moving on. Patriarchy affects both men and women. Patriarchy suppresses both men and women. Women doesn't suppress men more likely than the patriarchy suppresses men and women. What is the patriarchy in itself? Well, patriarchy is a mentality, it's a principal belief, it's an ideology that you have to reject or you have to suppress anything that is not connotated with masculinity, regardless whether you're a man, regardless whether you're a girl. Whether it especially affects the girl because by birth defect, they are a girl itself, thus having less masculinity. The characterization coming from Mukris here, how it affects men also, because men are also affected by these expectations to become manly, specifically in the workplace, specifically how you have to be masculine and project masculinity in yourself, where you are forced in your gender roles, where you have to break your back every single day to make bread for your family, where you have to meet every single expectation to your workplace, towards your social order. That's the idea of the patriarchy that they don't quite seem to understand. I will handle two things from the whip and the argument before going on to the main issues here. Handling with the whip first. The problem that they want to say is, the argument that he had or the issue that he had is women will discriminate men more. That has been brought down by Jasmine's POI and my characterization and clarification of what a patriarchy even means. But what he lacked is attacking Mukris's point, where he brought to you 4 simple reasons why men are also affected by it and why men can also benefit the feminist movement and themselves, where we reduce the where we reduce the resentment that exists, where we demonize men, where we demonize every single man, from your father to your boyfriend to your friend down the street, that they are the reason that you are where you are right now, being suppressed. Secondly, we also make that a fact to accept both men and women who suffer from the same thing, which are they are the victims of masculinity or the victims of patriarchy. Third thing, also sit down, where Mukris also said that cooperation between men and women is vital. And we're not saying that men will dominate over women, which is the main argument from them, but I will take them on later on, ladies and gentlemen. The reason that we work together is the relatability factor that exists because they're the victims of the same crime. And the contradicting thing that he said lastly is that the world is becoming more liberal, so we're accepting more liberal people. That basically negates OG's case right there. But let's tackle the also extension that they want to talk about here. I am shocked
so you deserve to be shot too. I am forced to obey expectations, so you are also forced to obey expectations. That is the characterization on why men, when they join this feminist movement, will dominate over women. 3 reasons why it will not happen coming from Mukris again. First of all, numbers. The numbers will never be equal for them, and men will never ever be dominant or have a majority over a feminist movement over the women themselves. So they won't have that much of dominant effect. But 2 other reasons, specifically, if they do want to dominate over men, which is very unlikely to happen, it's very, sit down, it's very unlikely to happen because it goes against the altruistic nature on why they join in the first place. Principally, if you are the victims of whatever crime you say, you don't want that's recycled to repeat. You don't want other people to be affected by it. That's why you go out the street and march and protest every single day to stop other people from getting affected by it. Secondly, you not only fight for men, but you fight against the idea that you have to be masculine. By dominating over women, it goes against the reason they would join in the first place. You sit down. And thirdly, this won't happen because the idea of it, of the he-she movement, is the cooperation of men and women combating patriarchy, which suppresses both of us, where we will cooperate together because there's relatability factor, where it is the lowest common denominator affecting all of us. And secondly, how we want to propagate both our wants and needs, which are very similar together with each other because they're affected by the same thing. The extension is brought down. 3 issues that we have to go through today. What happens if we don't even have Emma Watson going up there? And what happens if we even don't have the he for she movement in itself? Before I move on, anyone of you?
Sir, don't you think that for men to defend against sexism, they will also have to attack the people who are being sexist against them, which are women?
Ladies and gentlemen, nothing was established that women are being sexist towards men. None of it has been brought up. But even if it is brought up, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that it is clear for them to do so. It's justified for them to do so because any form of patriarchy or rejecting masculinity should be rejected. Now, what happens if we didn't have Emma Watson coming up there and giving her speeches? 3 things that would happen, also coming from Mukiz's speech here, where we create no awareness of the evolution of liberalism, where we do not have a full representation of the evolution of liberal feminism. If we don't have those things, it's very bad. Because people will believe and see that you do not represent fully what is liberal feminism, because you do not connotate it with whatever evolution that is going on. Secondly, why it's bad if we don't have it, because we don't have a role model to propagate. The reason Emma Watson's speech was so great, because she has influence that penetrates any other cultural feminism that you have. From Saudi Arabia to Singapore, from Malaysia to Massachusetts, ladies and gentlemen, the role model is fully relatable, and we can achieve that kind of attraction that we want in this, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's go on to the idea on how, even if it's connotated with negative connotation of Western, how the cultural people will also accept it. Sit down, overview. We will reduce the effectivity of why people negatively connotate Western connotations to feminism. Because first of all, we're humanizing the problem. We're humanizing and telling you that not every single male you meet is the problem for all your guilt. That men are also victims of it, and there are some people, men, that do not support the patriarchy in itself. Secondly, we don't evolve any resentment because we're not attacking or labeling or demonizing any party. We're approaching it compassionately, and we're approaching it in the edge of cooperation between these two. Why is this good? Okay, if it is shocking and we don't have any of this happening to her, people will reject it. People will reject whatever Amsa has to say, whatever. Because the message that what we want to propagate here is not associating resentment towards this. That's why the main purpose is not to call men or label men the problems of the patriarchy, where not every single male is a problem of that. This is good because it has easier acceptance for people to accept it. Assuming that you are a male in Saudi Arabia and you do suppress your whatever female that you have, we encourage discourse, and because we allow a safe, peaceful way. Because we're no longer attacking them, no longer pointing fingers to them saying that you are the causation of this, but we're also saying that we can work this out together. And it's even better for these independent women themselves because it sheds a new light on men. On men-hating issues where women have on men because of patriarchy, we reduce the idea. And the independence of women can also still exist because we're not fighting for men to be dominant over women by joining feminism. At the end of the day, you have to understand that the evolution of feminism is there. Stagnancy will never allow feminism to gain traction because it loses the liberal supporters. And the reason why Emma Watson's speech was so influential, because it penetrates the cultural feminism that they have, and it can spread the messages even wider than it is, rather than just constricting itself in liberalism, which is the main idea which side government wants to fight. For all that reasons, go with side closing opposition.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. floor, shake hands, and directly go to level 3 from your dinner.
Thanks, my rod.